Hey Grandmasters, Mike from the WCA with the solution portion of your update. And of course we know none of you have come here first, that you've set up the positions we gave you on a chessboard and worked very hard trying to figure them out, right? Yes. Anyway, this position came from a tournament that's actually going on as I speak out in Las Vegas. And I just happened to download a bunch of the games that were played. That's the cool thing about technology these days, right? You get to see all these master games. You just get them on your computer and go over them. So turned out some of the games I went over had some really instructive positions in them. And I like using modern stuff, current positions too, just to give you guys an idea of the type of chess that's being played today in real tournaments. So anyway, Black's in a little bit of trouble here because of the fact, you can just see in the position their development is so bad. There are a couple of issues for White. They need to be careful. Number one, this rook is hanging with check, and you definitely don't want to give that away. So even if White had just protected that rook, he may have been okay, but it turned out, and maybe you guys found it too, that the move knight takes f7 is just absolutely crushing. So it's not only a fork hitting the rook and queen here, it stops the rook from being captured, number two. Number three, it shatters these pawns. And when you add all that together, actually there's a fourth one. Check out this bishop here. You see that line? Yeah, you're actually hitting that rook up there, which is really bad for Black. It's completely winning. It's a real devastating shot. And the key to finding those moves, if I back it up for a minute, is a little hint that when your opponent is completely tied up and they have basically no pieces out, that should signal to you that you almost are playing with an extra piece or two. Because if your opponent's pieces, for example, check out this guy here, this bishop on c8 and the rook on a8, they're completely out of the game. Your bishop on f1 is blocked here, but if this queen happens to move, do you see how quickly it can get into the game? Now, after this sacrifice, once that pawn disappears, you see how these two pawns actually weaken as well? I want you to keep an eye on that when you see the end of this combination. And then also in one of the lines, how quickly this bishop can get into the game as compared to this guy here. Okay, so Black takes, and then you have to find the follow-up, which was this awesome queen takes e6 check. And that's a really hard move to find if you're not used to doing tactics. It's like you're giving away your queen, but if the king takes that queen after bishop to c4, it's actually checkmate. Isn't that cool? Look how well these pieces work together. This rook guards the fifth rank. Even the pawn is taking a square away from the king. You look at these raking bishops here, and this rook here participating, protecting the pawn. Your whole army is working, and the king is mated in the middle of the board. So back here, after your knight sack, you get to sack the queen, but this time they can't take it. So the only legal move is king f8. And then you have a surprising move. A lot of things win here. You're down a piece, but Black is so exposed. But the strongest continuation is don't take this rook here, because your rook here will fall with check. I don't know how much of this you guys saw, but the fastest way to win would be to just grab this knight here with your rook. And I know it looks kind of strange to allow this rook to get into the game and take something to get out of trouble, but now you see what happens when these white squares open up. You have this really cool move, bishop c4, and you have checkmates coming on these squares. It's basically unstoppable. White can try to stall, or Black rather, say give a check. And I like this move, just like rook d1, d2. Keep your bishop on this line. This is the only check they have. And then after you tuck your king in, you can just go over this yourself. There's no way to stop the attack on the light squares. The game is pretty much over, okay? So let's just go back and review. Again, don't forget the little tricks for finding these moves in the first place. These are called destructive sacrifices, and that usually means you're breaking up the pawn structure. You can see my mouse toggle back and forth. And once that pawn structure breaks, the rest of your pieces are just going to flow in. So king took, and then you have to find this follow-up. Really cool move. Queen takes e6, and the rest is kind of history. Back here, so again, finding this move, rook takes knight, is not so easy. A lot of people, I would suspect, may have seen queen g6, which is also very strong, because now you're threatening the rook for free, and there's all sorts of pressure. And if they try to save themselves, you can just come right in on these dark squares or light squares again, and you should be able to see this attack. Move like knight e5, and we're just going to mate this king. Queen check, king e8, take a rook with check, king d7, and now this cool sequence, bishop b5 check. And that's really, really strong because we're trying to get the king to move so we could take a free queen. The king is the only piece protecting that queen. So say they block with their knight. So this is all completely winning. Rook g7, king e6, and instead of taking that free queen before, we play this line because we have a forced mate. I think it's mate in 2 here. Yeah. Can you guys see it? Queen h3. Awesome move. Again, look at the entire white army, how beautifully placed all those pieces are. Knight has to block. Queen takes the horse. Game is finished. Okay, the second position was from Varuzhin Akopian, who did that long lecture exercise we gave. He's a really, really good player to follow his games. You can learn so much from this guy. And I'm actually going to show you how the players got to this position. The winning move was knight b5. I don't know if you guys found that or not. By playing that move, black just resigned here. There's a big issue for black here. If you take the knight, simply the bishop takes back check, and there aren't many good ways to block that check. You'll see that the knight can't block it because you'll lose your queen. There's this nasty pin here. And if you block with the bishop, you're going to lose some material because the bishop will just take. And, wherever this king goes, if he moves underneath, you're going to have, an incredibly strong discovered check. And if you take, you just trade everything off here and probably just take here with the queen. And you have queen and rook against 2 rooks and a knight, and an extra pawn as well for white. And this is just completely winning. The queen is too active. This rook is going to get here very quickly, and this king is too exposed. So at the grandmaster level, this is over. But let me show you how he got there real quick. So in the game, it starts off as a modern defense, and right now after g6, this could be several different openings, and even from here it doesn't really have a name yet. It can still kind of turn into lots of different openings, but the modern is basically an idea of laying back. You see how black is sticking to these 3 ranks, so that he's kind of allowing white to take all this space, and eventually they're going to strike back with pawn breaks. That's the idea of the modern. So you develop kind of behind the lines, hope that white pushes too much, and then you get to break their structure and counterattack later. But Akopian, he's such a strong positional player, and he kind of just plays these classical moves. Knight c3, just developing the knight. And here's that modern flavor. The knight goes to d7. Again, everything's really tight inside these lines, and Akopian just grabs more space with e4, opening up his light square bishop. Black pushes in the middle with e5, and rather than just take and start making exchanges, he develops a piece here on g5 with a tempo, because you're either going to block with a pawn or block with a piece, and in either case, white gets a little something out of it. So black chose in the position to block with the pawn. And I know it looks bad because Akopian had to retreat, but he did get something for that little exchange there. The pawn can't go backwards, and the pawn obviously takes away this square from the knight here. And black breaks another one of the rules in chess that says, don't move the same piece twice in the opening. So he moves his bishop for a second time. Although, if you put this on a computer, you wouldn't find that black is lost yet. And then Akopian just protects the bishop with the queen and gets prepared to castle queenside, and black wants to make that trade. But you have to remember, that's the third time that bishop is moved already. So queen took back, and then there's that, tucked in development again for black. So it looks very solid, but again, the problem is black really isn't attacking anything. And Akopian plays a really cool move now. I like this a lot. He could castle, which would be a very natural move to play. But after black played knight e7, he noticed now that black can castle. And if black gets to castle, maybe this pawn structure here would be solid enough to get him through the middle game and, get the light squared bishop out. And if he could, maybe these pawns all on dark squares might make up for the fact that the dark square bishop's not on the board. But Akopian says, nope, I'm not going to let you castle. And he plays queen h6, and it's really hard to get her out of there. If you try to kick her out with the knight, you're going to lose your rook. Ouch. Yeah, that's pretty bad, right? The rook is trapped, so that's not going to work. So the queen is there for good. And so black decides maybe he can get away with castling on the queen side. So he plays c6, give his queen a little outlet here. And then rather than rushing the attack, again, what I love about Akopian, he's always fully developed before he takes action, and he castles queenside. And this rook is going to put some pressure on the d file. The king is out of the way. No worries on this diagonal. There's no dark squared bishop, and your queen's already guarding it. So out comes the queen. And this is a key moment in the game. Going over a lot of master games will teach you this stuff. When, again, very similar to the last position, your opponent's king is in the middle of the board and he's not developed. So you have the same exact problem here. See the bishop I'm highlighting on c8 and the rook on a8? This is the exact position they were in the first problem we gave you. So to take advantage of that again, create open lines. And Akopian does it beautifully here. He plays c5, which hits two of black's pieces, the queen and the pawn. And this is another good point to remember. Whenever a pawn hits two different points, it's going to take something, or it always has the option, because you can't run away with two pieces at the same time. The only way you could do that is if you could give a check here, but black doesn't have any good checks. So he kind of is forced to either take or allow white to take. So he takes there, and then Akopian takes the other way. He takes on e5. This way, if there's a trade, and black is kind of inviting trades because he doesn't have that much space, but the problem, of course, is every trade that black makes just seems to open up the game more. And this is the position that we got to. And again, as I mentioned earlier, Akopian is not going to do anything fancy until he's fully developed. So which piece hasn't he developed? It's the bishop here on f1. And it's kind of interesting where he plays it for a couple of reasons. One, it can't be disturbed that easily right now. And two, it kind of takes away a really good square from this bishop here from coming to e6. So white continues just putting pressure, connecting the rooks, and black decided here to tuck the queen into c7. If you had played a move like bishop to d7, now you have to watch out for moves like queen g7 attacking the rook. What do you do with it? Well, looks like that's the only safe square. And again, castling is going to leave this knight hanging here. Let me just go back here. If black were to castle, nothing would be guarding this knight here on e7. So if you move your rook to safety, and I think white's simplest plan might just be to double rooks. With rook d2, you kind of have all this pressure on this line, and you're preparing to swing this rook over here. And it doesn't look like black is going to get out of this. The queen could start taking pawns at any time, and the pawn on e5 is hanging. But kind of cool stuff, right? You don't have to be in such a rush to grab these pawns. Just keep putting all the pressure, and the game might even just win itself. So anyway, in the real game, Queen C7 was played, and then in comes the queen attacking the rook. Rook went to F8, and it's at this point Knight B5 was played, and black just resigned. Okay, here is an endgame. This was the next puzzle. An endgame from a game between Max DeLugia. I don't have his partner's name here available, but Max went into finance after a number of years, strong grandmaster, just started playing again, known for his blitz chess, really, really fast player. And he found the knockout shot here with white, and that was the move. Sorry, the knight was on F4. Sorry, guys. He finds this cool move, rook takes here. He's going to give away a piece, and after this exchange, black just resigned, believe it or not. Now, it's funny, he has an extra knight, but he's helpless because the pawn pushes, and the only piece that can stop the pawn would have been the knight. So say knight d5, you push the pawn again, and that forces the knight to a square that guards the queening square, and then you're just going to walk your king in and pressure this pawn. The problem is the knight can never move, and soon it's going to be these three pawns just pushing up the board. So I'll give you one sample line. Say the king tries to hang on to his pawn, you just start pushing. And, black can try to stall you, but you just keep coming with your pawns. This is just a sample. There's a bunch of ways to win. Just wanted to give you an idea of the pattern. The knight is a short-range piece. If you had a queen here, somewhere, you could put a queen on that square, and she could attack this entire line, this entire diagonal, and still keep an eye on this pawn. Or she could come to a square like this on d5, keep an eye on the queening square, and attack everything over here. Knights, unfortunately, can't do that. They're short-range pieces, and that's how you find those tactics, okay? So again, here, you see the trick? And knowing that you can get that pawn up the board quickly will force the knight to, tie itself down. You're going to end up with some position like this, and sooner or later, you're just going to start pushing away. Come in with your king. Doesn't matter if they block, just check, and the game is over. King h8, knight c7, and I don't know, let's make a rook. Checkmate. Pretty cool, right? And here's a position we didn't give you a puzzle for. We're just trying to share you, little by little, we're trying to get the WCA students to be familiar or be current with chess, kind of learn who these players are and where these big tournaments are being held. The North American Open's been going on for years, played out in Las Vegas. It's a lot of fun. Usually you get adults that travel out there from the East Coast. The kids don't, but you get a lot of kids from California and Nevada and Texas that are kind of closer to the venue that do go out and play. And that's everything these days. You're going to see really, really young players mixing it up in these positions. But anyway, this is Rufang Li against Nick Korba. Li has the white pieces. And I just want to show you how this game finished because they kind of followed that classical idea of attacking on each side when you're castled on opposite wings. You see that the white king here is on the king's side and black is on the queen's side. So, being a strong master, bishop f4 just brings the last piece into the game, connects the rooks. Knight d6 kind of forces this trade bishop for knight because there's a weak square here on c4, and if that knight can get into c4, it's very hard to eliminate it. And once it gets in there, it's going to kind of slow up this pawn attack and start controlling squares in white's half. So Li trades it off. Queen takes to keep the structure fine, and up comes the pawn. And then each player now continues, according to playing on opposite wings. So maybe the knight is trying to swing over to the king side, and then black or white rather is going to keep pushing on the queen side. This is standard stuff. And here's another standard move, king b8. And this kind of move is played to, when you castle queenside, you kind of tuck your king in so that he can guard all three of these pawns. And who knows, you might even put the knight in there if you had to defend something. It's kind of a good flexible move. So now the knight goes backwards. You should know what that's about. He's going to relocate because he has a really nice square here on c5. And what would be the only way for black to keep white out of there? Yeah, I guess you see that you would push a pawn. But if you push a pawn, because white has pushed his pawn all the way to a5, he's going to take it, most likely, and that's going to open the a file, and white's going to have a lot of pressure. So black decides to go the other way with his knight, and that's obviously to come into squares like f4, gain some time, hit the queen, attack squares in front of the king. White continues improving the knight. Of course, there's a tempo. Queen f3, keep some pressure on the knight, and here comes black on the king side. Knight c5. These moves, like, I think really anybody, especially in the 4 o'clock class, should be able to find these moves. G5. Black's just going to keep coming, and this was a mistake. It was probably necessary in this position after knight c5 to play rook d to e8, and the reason is white's next move was a6 in the game, and if he plays it now, black doesn't have to take it. He can push and attack the knight, and it looks really bad. Let's say you hop this knight in and attack the queen, but it turns out this is slightly better for black because the queen's just going to run away, protect the knight, and this knight, even though it's really deep in black's territory, there's sometimes a problem when knights get to the 7th rank because there's no 9th rank up here. You can't see my mouse cursor, but it's actually above this king. You can't attack those squares. So this knight, believe it or not, can't really get out now. He's kind of trapped. So it's going to give black a lot of time to continue attacking. So the problem was, if we come back here, black played g5, and he missed now that a6 doesn't work, because if you push it in this position, the problem here is the knight, when it gets to b7, it's going to fork the queen and the rook, and I think black missed that. If you take the pawn, then the rook's just going to take, hitting the queen. Let's say queen e7, and then you just slide your rook over, and you have an enormous amount of pressure here. But you have to be careful. If this were a real game, if this had happened, black's going to play a move like rook d8, or e8 rather, and if you're not careful, you should see that there's mate in 2. Sack the queen, check, and you're going to get mated. But if you make an escape square, and if black tries to cover up here, you have moves like b6, and that's just going to completely devastate black's position. So that would be losing. Okay, but it turned out after a6, black just continued hitting the queen. The queen went down to d1, and then rook d to g8. And here the problem is pawn takes pawn, and this is a really strong move, as you'll see. Knight goes to e6, and I think black missed in this whole combination this move queen a4, which is really just crushing. There's no way out of this. There's so much pressure coming up that line. You're threatening just mate in 1 in the game. Like if a6 is played, just knight takes, king takes, knight c5 check, knight takes, and don't take the knight yet. Throw in this really nice check, and what does black do? If king c8, you just take the pawn, hitting the queen. Say the queen moved away, and then you have that very powerful pawn wedge on the 6th rank, and you guys should see that black is in big trouble here. Okay, so anyway, this was a look at some master and grandmaster chess that's current. It's a lot of work we put in the update. Hopefully you guys are still doing some chess at home. All right, so we'll see you on the 18th, and yeah, all that good stuff.